You've seen them, right? Tucked away in toy boxes or maybe standing guard on a shelf. But have you ever really stopped to think about the humble toy soldier? Well, today we're going to dive into the secret life of these little figures, and trust me, it's way deeper than you think. We're going to start with this really powerful idea that these aren't just little pieces of plastic. There's something more. They're like these guardians standing right on the line between the world we know and the incredible worlds inside our own heads. And that's really the big question for us today. What if there's more going on here? We're going to peel back the layers on this everyday object and find out how it's actually a piece of history, a tool for our minds, and yeah, even a portal into our own psychology. To really get the toy soldier, we have to go back. I mean, way back. Because you see, for most of human history, these little figures weren't for playing with at all. Their original job was way more serious. That's right. The first ones were basically symbols. Think about it for a second. The act of shrinking a warrior down is this ancient human thing. It's a way to take something huge and terrifying and chaotic, like war, and literally hold it in the palm of your hand. It's about finding some sense of order, some control over these massive, unpredictable forces. And their journey through history is just fascinating. In ancient Egypt, you had clay amulets, basically for protection. The Romans carried around little lead figures as talismans for good luck. Then, by the time you get to the Renaissance, they've become these incredible, detailed pewter figures. But they were art. They were status symbols for the rich, the elite. For centuries, these were strictly for adults, not for kids. So what changed? How did these fancy objects for the rich end up in pretty much every toy box on the planet? Well, that brings us to our next chapter, the revolutions that basically gave these silent legions to the masses. And it really comes down to two major revolutions. First, you've got the Industrial Revolution, which suddenly made it possible to mass-produce tin soldiers. Then, in the 20th century, the Plastic Revolution made them super cheap, super durable, and just everywhere. This completely changed the game, not just for who owned them, but for what they were even for.
And you can see that whole story right here. It's this clear shift, you know? It goes from clay and lead, which were talismans for pretty much everyone, to this fancy pewter for just the elite. Then, boom, the industrial age brings tin soldiers to the middle class, used for play, but also kind of as patriotic propaganda. And that leads us right to the modern plastic figure, where its main job becomes being a tool for a kid's imagination.
So we've covered the history, the materials, the what, and the how. But this is where the story, for me, gets really fascinating. Now we get to the why. Why on earth do we give children miniature versions of soldiers to play with? Let's really dig into that question, because the answer tells us something pretty profound about how our minds work, especially when we're kids. Turns out, the battlefield on the living room carpet isn't really about war. It's about something else completely. And here's the switch. The toy soldier went from being a piece of state propaganda to a prop for personal storytelling. They stopped being just symbols of some big conflict and became little actors in a child's private drama. So what you realize is a kid isn't rehearsing war. They're rehearsing identity. They're figuring out complicated ideas like heroism and villainy and sacrifice, all on their own terms. So this kind of play is doing some really important psychological work. It's a safe space, right? A place for a kid to face their fears. They get to try on different hats. What's it like to be the hero, or the villain, or the one who survives? It's how they start to figure out morality, to feel a sense of agency, of being in control. Just the act of lining them up is this little ritual of control, of bringing order to a messy inner world. Okay, this brings us to our final and maybe the deepest layer of this whole thing. The toy soldier isn't just a toy. It's not just a psychological tool. It's what our source material calls a philosophical portal. It connects us to some of the biggest questions about who we are. And this is the ultimate question, isn't it? Why do we keep doing this? This constant need to miniaturize our biggest, scariest conflicts. The answer really gets to the heart of how we try to make sense of a world that can be violent and, honestly, pretty incomprehensible. The whole concept is called taming chaos. It's this basic human impulse we have to shrink down these huge, overwhelming forces to a space we can actually manage. When we do that, we make them less threatening. We make them understandable. And we make them safe enough to explore inside our own imagination. And this just nails the central paradox perfectly.
These little figures represent one of the most destructive things humans do, and yet, in the hands of a child, they become these vessels for pure creation. They are conflict and imagination, destruction and storytelling all at once.
So when you boil it all down, the toy soldier plays two last profound roles. First, they're vessels of memory. The way they look, their uniforms, their poses, that all reflects how we as a culture choose to remember our history, our heroes, our resilience. And second, they're philosophical portals. They're the bridge between the harsh reality of conflict and the endless, hopeful potential of our dreams. So the next time you see one, maybe on a dusty shelf or in a kid's hand, just standing there, maybe you'll see it a little differently. Not just as a toy, but as a talisman, a storyteller, a vessel of memory. A tiny, silent guardian standing on that border between what's real and what we can dream. So what story will it tell you?